1942, Stalingrad. The day Katya Volkova's world ended began like any other morning in hell. She was standing at her apartment window when 3 Wehrmacht soldiers dragged her husband Dmitry into the street below. His hands were bound behind his back with wire, his face already swollen from interrogation. Blood streamed from his nose and mouth, but Dmitry Volkov, senior lieutenant in the NKVD for 15 years, refused to make a sound. The German Obergefreiter stepped forward, drew his Walther P-38 pistol, and pressed it against the base of Dmitry's skull. 1 shot. The crack echoed through the ruins. Dmitry's body crumpled to the cobblestones. Just like that, Katya Volkova became a widow. Her 15-year-old son, Mikhail, watched from behind her, gripping the Mosin Nagant rifle he'd taken from a dead Soviet soldier 3 days earlier. He lunged for the door. Katya caught him, wrapped her arms around his chest, fighting to hold him back as he screamed for his father. Old Mrs. Fedorova from across the hall grabbed them both, her voice urgent and harsh. "The boy needs to leave. Now. The Germans are coming up the stairs." They could hear boots on the stairwell, German voices shouting "Raus! Raus!", the sound of doors being kicked in, women screaming. Another gunshot. Mrs. Fedorova pointed north, toward where artillery fire thundered without ceasing. The Soviet 62nd Army still holds the factory district, the tractor factory, Barricade, Red October steel plant. He can fight there. Mikhail looked at his mother one last time. His eyes, which had been boy's eyes just days ago, had changed into something harder. "I'll come back for you, Mama, when we push them out." She knew he was lying. She knew she would probably never see him again, but she nodded anyway. He slipped out through the kitchen window onto the fire escape, just as the Germans kicked in their door. 2 young soldiers swept in with their Karabiner 98K rifles raised. One struck Katya across the face with his rifle butt when she didn't move fast enough. The world went gray, then black. That was how Katya Volkova's war truly began, not with the first German bombs that had fallen on Stalingrad weeks earlier, not with the distant sound of Wehrmacht tanks crossing the steppe. It began with her husband's execution, her son's flight to battle, and the realization that she was now completely, utterly alone in a city that had become hell on earth. When Katya regained consciousness, the Germans were gone. They'd ransacked the apartment, taken everything of value, the radio, the food, even the photographs from the walls. Her wedding ring had been torn from her finger, leaving the skin raw and bleeding. Her left eye was swollen shut. 3 teeth felt loose in her mouth. Through the shattered window, she could hear the new reality of occupied Stalingrad settling in. German voices barking orders, the rumble of Opel Blitz supply trucks, and the deeper growl of Stug 3 assault guns prowling the streets. And underneath it all, like a heartbeat that never stopped, the constant thunder of artillery from the north, where Soviet forces still fought. The city had been split in 2. South of the railway station, the 71st Infantry Division controlled the ruins. North, in the factory district, General Vasily Chuikov's 62nd Army clung to every building, every room, every pile of rubble. Somewhere in that hell, her son Mikhail was learning to kill or learning to die. A knock at the door. Katya froze, but a woman's voice called softly, "Katya, it's Svetlana." Young Svetlana Mikhailovna from apartment 12, barely 18, a music student before the war, carried a small bundle. Black bread mixed with sawdust to stretch the flour, and a jug of brown water that was probably contaminated, but at least it was wet. "I saw what happened to Dmitry," Svetlana whispered. her eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry." Over the following weeks, Katya learned the rules of survival in occupied Stalingrad, and every rule was written in blood. Rule 1. Never look Germans in the eye. Eye contact could be interpreted as defiance, and defiance meant a rifle butt to the face or worse. Katya learned to move through the streets with her gaze fixed on the rubble-strewn ground, making herself small and invisible. Rule 2. The daily ration line at 6 a.m. was mandatory. Miss it, and you didn't eat. The Germans distributed 200 grams of bread per person, barely enough to sustain life. Sometimes the bread never came at all. Katya stood in those lines every morning, watching women collapse from hunger and exhaustion, watching German soldiers casually shoot anyone who complained or protested. Rule 3. Curfew was absolute. Anyone on the streets after dark was shot without warning. Katya learned to mark the hours by the sound of executions, single rifle shots echoing through the ruins as German patrols found curfew violators. Rule 4, the most important rule. Never ever let them know you had family in the Red Army. Never mention that your husband had been NKVD. Never speak of a son fighting in the factory district. The Germans kept lists. They were systematic, methodical. Anyone connected to the Soviet government, to the military, to the Communist Party, they were all marked for death. Katya had learned these rules fast. Others learned them too late. On the third day after Dmitri's execution, she watched German soldiers drag Pavel Sokolov from apartment 7 into the street. Pavel had been a school teacher, a gentleman who'd taught literature and poetry. Someone had informed the Germans that Pavel's brother was a commissar with the Red Army. The Germans made Pavel kneel in the street while an officer read charges from a paper. Then they shot him in the back of the head. They left his body in the street for 2 days as a warning. On the 7th day, Katya witnessed something that made her understand just how completely their world had changed. A young woman named Irina Petrova, 19 years old, newly married before the war, was caught stealing a potato from a German supply depot. The punishment was public. They stripped her naked in the central square and whipped her with leather belts until her back was ribbons of torn flesh. Then they shot her anyway. The message was clear. You are not human. You are livestock. Behave as livestock or be slaughtered as livestock. But even livestock needs to eat, and food was disappearing. Before the Germans came, Stalingrad had been a city of 400,000 people. Now, with refugees flooding in from the surrounding countryside and the city cut off from supplies, perhaps 600,000 or 700,000 civilians remained in the ruins. The Germans fed their own soldiers first, their allies second, and the Soviet civilian population barely at all. Katya's daily ration, when it came, was 200 grams of bread. That's about 7 ounces. A single slice of modern bread weighs about 1 ounce. Imagine surviving on 7 slices of bread per day and nothing else. No meat, no vegetables, no fat, no sugar. Just bread mixed with sawdust and bark because there wasn't enough flour. Within 2 weeks, Katya could feel her body beginning to consume itself. Her clothes hung loose. Her hip bones jutted out sharply. When she looked in the broken mirror, the face staring back had sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed too large for the skull. She wasn't alone. Every woman in the building was starving. Mrs. Fedorova, who had been plump and grandmotherly before the Germans came, now looked like a skeleton wrapped in loose skin. Svetlana's youthful beauty had been replaced by a gaunt, haunted appearance that made her look decades older. Hunger changed people in ways Katya hadn't imagined possible. It wasn't just physical weakness.
It was a mental fog, a constant exhaustion that made thinking difficult. Simple tasks became overwhelming. Walking up the stairs to her third-floor apartment left her gasping and dizzy. Hunger became the only thought, the only reality. Everything else, fear, grief, even the desire to live became secondary to the desperate, gnawing need for food. And the Germans knew this. They understood that starvation was a weapon more effective than bullets. On the 15th day after Dmitri's execution, Katya was standing in the ration line when she saw something that broke her heart. A mother, she couldn't have been more than 25 years old, was holding her infant child. The baby wasn't crying. That was the horrible part. The child was...
"Count your shots," Dmitriev whispered beside him. Dmitriev was 19, a veteran of 4 months, which made him ancient by Stalingrad standards. "Pick your targets. Officers first, then machine gunners, then anyone who looks like they know what they're doing." Mikhail had fired 67 rounds, far more than his daily ration. He'd killed at least 6 Germans that he was certain of, possibly more. His hands were black with powder residue and blood, some his own from a shrapnel cut across his palm, some from helping drag wounded men to cover. His ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear. He slumped against a wall in the basement, a different basement now, their third fallback position, and realized he was shaking you. Those memories seemed to belong to a different person, a different Mikhail who lived in a different world. That boy was gone. In his place was someone harder, colder, someone who could look at a German soldier and pull the trigger without hesitation. Meanwhile, south of the railway station, Katya was discovering that there were worse things than starvation. November arrived, bringing with it the first real cold. Stalingrad's winters were notoriously harsh. Temperatures could drop to -30.
She became someone she wouldn't have recognized 3 months earlier. A thief, a saboteur, someone who could risk death for a can of food. But even with the stolen supplies, life continued to deteriorate. The cold grew worse. The death toll from starvation and exposure mounted daily. Bodies appeared in the streets every morning,
people who'd simply frozen to death during the night, unable to find shelter or fuel. The Germans left the corpses where they lay for days, sometimes weeks, as warning. Rats, now we squeeze until they surrender or die. The exhausted soldiers cheered with what little strength they had left. Mikhail found himself laughing, though whether from relief or hysteria, he wasn't sure. They'd survived. Against all odds, through months of the most brutal combat in military history, they'd held the line long enough for this moment to arrive. But the fighting wasn't over. The trapped Germans fought with the desperation of men who knew they were doomed. December brought battles even more ferocious than October's offensive. The Germans tried repeatedly to break out of the encirclement, throwing their remaining panzer divisions at the Soviet lines in massive armored assaults. Each time, they were thrown back with terrible losses, on both sides. Mikhail's unit was transferred to blocking positions near the Volga, where they faced German attempts to capture the ferry crossings. The battles were short-range, brutal affairs.
Through sheer stubborn will, sat down on a pile of rubble and wept like a child. Katya stood there, feeling nothing at first, numb. Then slowly, the realization began to sink in. It was over. The Germans were gone. She'd survived. But at what cost?
The next days were chaos as Soviet authorities tried to organize relief for the surviving civilians. Food was distributed, real food, not the starvation rations the Germans had. Stood there in the ruins of Stalingrad, mother and son, both of them survivors of hell, both of them changed in ways they couldn't fully articulate. Around them, the city smoldered. Bodies still lay in the rubble, tens of thousands of bodies, German and Soviet, that would take months to recover and bury. "Papa?" Mikhail asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "The first day, the Germans shot him. I'm sorry, Misha, I'm so sorry." Mikhail was silent for a long moment. Then, "He was right. About everything. About being hard. About the Germans. About what we'd need to survive." "He loved you," Katya said, "in his way. He was trying to prepare you." "I know. I understand now." Mikhail pulled back, looked at her with those two old eyes. "I killed a lot of them, Mama, Germans. I don't even know how many anymore. 30, maybe 40, maybe more. I should feel bad about it, but I don't. I just feel tired." "Come," Katya said, taking his hand. "Let's go home, or what's left of it." They walked through the ruins together back to the apartment building on Krasnaya Street. The building was still standing, though half the roof was gone.
"Do you hate him?" Mikhail asked quietly. "Papa, for how he treated us?" Katya was silent for a long time, thinking. Finally she said, "No, I understand now what he was doing. He was making us strong enough to survive this. It worked, Misha. We're alive because of what he taught us. That's his legacy. I wish I had told him I understood, before he died. I wish I had told him something. He knew. Trust me, he knew. He was proud of you. He told me so right before he died. His last words were about you. Tell the boy I was proud. Mikhail's jaw clenched. He nodded but didn't trust himself to speak. They stood there for a few more minutes, paying silent respects to a hard man who loved them in his hard way, who had prepared them for a brutal world and then died trying to save his son. Then they turned and walked home together, survivors in a city of survivors, carrying wounds that would never fully heal, but learning slowly to live with them. The devastation wasn't just physical. The psychological scars would last generations. Every survivor carried nightmares. Katya would wake screaming from dreams of German soldiers, of starvation, of the cold. Mikhail would wake reaching for his rifle, reliving battles that were over but never really ended in his mind. Mrs. Fedorova, who'd survived Stalin's purges and the German occupation through sheer stubborn will, died quietly in her sleep in March. The doctors said it was heart failure, but Katya thought it was simpler than that. The old woman had used up all her strength surviving. With the immediate danger past, there was nothing left to keep her going. Svetlana, the young music student, who'd survived the battle but would never be the same. The girl who'd once studied piano and dreamed of performing in Moscow now flinched at loud noises, couldn't stand to be touched, and had nightmares every night. She left Stalingrad in April, going to live with relatives in the Urals, trying to escape the memories. But some survivors found ways to rebuild, to move forward, to transform their trauma into something resembling meaning. Katya threw herself into the reconstruction effort. She worked 12-hour days, sometimes 16, clearing rubble and salvaging materials. It was hard, back-breaking labor, but it gave her purpose. Every brick she salvaged, every building she helped clear, was an act of defiance against the Germans who'd tried to destroy everything. They hadn't won. Stalingrad still stood, and she was going to help rebuild it. Mikhail struggled more. He'd seen too much, done too much, and felt too many things he didn't know how to process.